What is up, and welcome to the Sunday Debrief podcast. During the series Relationship Goals, we are going to have a conversation each week with some people, some great friends actually around mission, who are all figuring out the same thing every single week. How did what I hear on Sunday challenge what I think and change how I live? The whole goal is to figure out what it looks like to apply this stuff to our real lives so that we can live differently and actually live out the way of Jesus. And so we're just going to talk about that and have a conversation each week. So with me today, my name is Tommy. First of all, I never said that. My name is Tommy. I'm on staff at Mission and just get the honor of working with groups and pastoral care and some things like that. And with me today, I've got 3 guests, relationship series. So this is the only time where I'm going to ask you your relational status also. Future podcasts, we do this again. Probably not going to have to ask you that. But Robbie and Kayanna, introduce yourselves.
Well, you just said it. I'm Kayanna.
Yeah, I'm Robbie. So we've been at Mission a long time, since it started pretty much actually. And we've been married. We actually got married, 3 weeks before Mission started.
2 weeks, yeah.
So it's been almost 10 years, which is kind of crazy how fast time flies.
Love it. Kayanna, anything to add? Anything to fix?
Of course.
That's not me. We've been married almost 10 years. We have 2 little kiddos together.
Yep.
And
That happened.
yeah.
That did happen.
That's kind of where we're at.
Love it. Chris, tell us about yourself.
Hello, my name is Chris. I am the resident single here at Mission.
There we go. Yep.
I've been coming here for about 6 years and just absolutely loving it. And I'm stoked to be a part of the podcast.
Very nice. Very nice. So, we're talking about God's way today. Joda laid down a great message with cinder blocks and all, which is just the best kind of message anytime there are cinder blocks. So I can actually definitively say that because we've done cinder blocks a couple other times. They've all been great. But really the whole goal, again, is to talk through what she talked about and figure out what it means for us specifically. So I love to start by talking about this idea in general of God's way. We talked about how important it was to figure out what God's way really is, because everything else is just opinions, which I loved that when she said that. It was so helpful to make it really clear that opinions are fine, but they're not something that you build a foundation on and build a life on. So real quick, what's to start too? What's the worst relationship advice you've ever gotten? You get like 10 seconds for this. Just give me something. What's the worst relationship advice?
Oh yeah. Mine is follow your heart.
Yeah. Tell me why.
Yeah. It's like, I'm thinking about it like, think about if you go to Whole Foods, right? And there's that dessert section, right? And I'm following my heart. How am I going to walk out of there? Like poor, fat, and feeling totally sick. So
there you go.
Like it's the truth in relationships. If I followed my heart, it's like, it would not have gone well.
It's a beautiful metaphor. Robbie, that was very poetic.
He thought about it.
Oh, I like it.
I think for me, the worst advice is kind of just like this mentality of settling or compromising. Just like the fact that, I have to get married eventually, so might as well just settle now. You know, for me, that's like the idea of like buying a car with 3 wheels. You know, it's like you can get there. It might not go as smooth. You can still turn, but eventually you might crash. You know, so it's like,
sounds about right.
Why would you do that though? It's wouldn't you rather wait out for the car that has 4 wheels that you know it's gonna not crash? You're gonna get there safely and you're gonna have at least a nice time driving. So it's I don't like the idea that people are like, you should just settle now or you should just settle eventually.
Yeah,
instead of
like
actually,
it's better to be with somebody. So
exactly,
don't waste time. Like waste what time? I'm doing fine.
It's definitely not better to be with somebody if you only have 3 wheels. Just putting that out there.
right?
That's good. I like that.
Wait, you speaking from personal experience?
And professional.
There you go. I did forget to mention that Kayanna might be almost licensed. I can't say licensed, right?
Almost.
All right, almost licensed marriage and family therapist. So don't trust what the rest of us guys say. Really just trust what she says.
Yes.
Honestly, we have a ton of relationship advice coming at us all the time. So when it comes to relationship guidance, habits, principles, like what's built your view of how to do relationships from single, because that's a really viable and important stage. You don't do singleness right, you're not going to get the rest of it right either. So where's the majority of your relationship guidance come from in your life? What's been modeled for you? What are your normal sources for direction now? Like, how do you sort out what is God's way and what is everything else?
That's a good question.
It's a really good question.
I appreciate that.
Should we just like popcorn style? Or?
You do whatever Chris, you just volunteered to start first. So
okay, sure. So honestly, for me, I I kind of stems from growing up too. So I grew up in a Christian household. So I've always been kind of instilled with those values and just ideals. But everyone, you go through high school, you go through college, your ideals and visions just kind of get morphed. But for me, what really helped me out was a series from this guy called Ben Stewart. He did this series called Single, Dating, Engaged, Married. And for me, that was huge for kind of helping me kind of figure out like my list and what I'm looking for in a partner, and also how do I actually navigate this time of singleness? Because your singleness isn't just for you, it's for an undistracted devotion to God. So that was really huge for me, is kind of going through that whole series.
Hey, good news too. When we launch relationship goals groups at the end of this month, guess what we have men's and women's groups going through? It's called Life and Love.
Yeah.
He renamed it, but same series. So it's honestly, it's so good. Like there's a lot of advice out there, but really going back to the thing that promises to be biblically based, promises to be like not a quick fix too. There's nothing about that series. What I love about it is there's nothing quick fix about it. It's not like how to clean it all up real fast and find the right person, go.
Yeah, there's no clickbait about it, you know?
Yeah. It's just like how to navigate the stages however long they last. If it's clickbaity, it's probably not great.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, watch this to get married in the next 10 weeks. It's here, whatever stage of life you're at, here's how you can navigate it the best way possible.
Oh, that's good. Cool. What about you guys? What's relational guidance coming back all the way to high school, before you dated, maybe while you were dating?
Well, I think for me, like most of us, the biggest kind of source of information for relationships was my family, which, there are a lot of beautiful things that I was able to take from that, and then some maybe things that I had to unlearn a little bit. And then, high school and all of that, definitely influence from friends and culture and all of that. But similar to Chris, I was blessed to grow up in a home environment and then also a church environment where I was being taught these principles that I was able to take with me, especially once I left home. And that had a great influence once I was able to kind of sort through, like, do I actually want to own that and begin to actually implement the things that the Bible talks about and what people have kind of modeled for me that I would judge as.
When did you do that sorting out process? Like I didn't grow up in a Christian home. And so there's a little bit like when I came to faith, I had to figure it out all at once. And it really made sense because I could do it all at the same time. It was like, well, probably all I got was maybe not great. And so now how do I just reevaluate everything? But if you grow up in it, maybe there's a lot of good to take out of it, but maybe there's some stuff that's like, well, that wasn't the best, or that wasn't quite right, or that was cultural, or that was, personal to them, and it was personality driven. And now it's like, well, that wasn't the principle, that was their opinion, even if it was a good opinion. So when did you do that? Was it while you were dating? Was it beforehand? Was it with somebody else? Did you put it all on the table all on a weekend and figure it all out? Like, how did you go through that process?
For me, I think it was gradual. Like a lot of it started early on, right, in terms of family and early environment. And then obviously it kind of became more and more intensive the closer I got to that stage of life in terms of dating and seriously kind of thinking about marriage and all of that. And so it was a process, some great mentors in my life and people that I think God just placed in my life. And then also some of that was me seeking it out. So like counseling, things like that. And then the real work came when I actually started really dating. The people that I dated before Robbie, that was, kind of a sorting process of like, okay, what does actually work for me? What do I actually believe in terms of how I'm going about this? And then it just got more intensive when I dated Robbie because he's pretty intense. And so we very quickly
he's intensely handsome. So you really had to do that. That makes a lot of sense. So you do as much as you can beforehand, but then as you date, it's like quick evaluation process to not just evaluate the person, but it sounds like you evaluated what you were bringing. And that was almost as important as the person you were dating. You were evaluating yourself. Who am I bringing into this?
Yeah.
That's really good. I love that. Well, so the first cinder block in the thing, the first step in the process, knowing God's way. And so we've got a little bit of that, but how, when it comes to the Bible specifically, because the challenge with the Bible too, is it's not just this thing. Chris, we were joking about this before. It was like, the Bible tells us a lot of things about relationships, but it doesn't say, Chris, yes, go ahead and date her. She's great.
Right.
It's not going to do that for you. And so what does it look like for you guys as you approach the Bible? Where have you had the most trouble figuring out what God's way actually is and where it stops, where God's way listed in the Bible for us is like, well, it doesn't get that granular for us. It doesn't get that specific about, again, like, yeah, date her, it's fine. Or you shouldn't date till you're 16. People were getting married at 16 when the Bible was written, and that was a lot different. That, like, it's just totally different world. So how do you navigate the principles, like the biblical principles we have for relationships, and where you have to then go and apply that and understand it yourself? How do you approach the Bible when it comes to relational guidance?
Yeah, I mean, that is tricky, right? Like, I think the more granular it gets, at least for me, the trickier it is. Because if it's like, oh, do we move to this apartment? Do we do that? You know, that's hard to really like decipher. And because it's true, like, even just a decision as simple as where do you go to college? Like, we went to college close, not the same school, but we were both in LA. And it's like, if she went to the East Coast and I was on the West Coast, we probably wouldn't have gotten married, you know? So you think about those little decisions, and like, you couldn't sit, I can sit there and kind of freak out, like, oh my gosh, if I make the wrong decision here, like, oh, I might not have met Kayanna. But in reality, it's like, no, like, I just need to take a step back, and God's in control, right? And I just need to, like, what I try to do, especially more recently, is just like, hey, like, God, I love you. I know that you've got this, but I really want to follow you. Would you, you know, like, even like if it's a big decision like that, hey, would you show me like if this isn't right? And if I don't feel like I hear anything, then it's like, okay, then I feel like as long as it's within like the boundaries of the playing field, you know, and like within, like if God says like, oh, don't do that, like, and it's very, very clear, then it's like, okay, obviously I'm not going to do that. But if it's something else, like, hey, who takes out the kitty litter? Like a conversation we were having yesterday, you know, it's like, hey, it's more based on the principles of like, okay, hey, how do I show love to you? How do we walk in on the wisdom that we know God's laid before us?
Yeah. So the Bible, yeah, you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that. I think it's like going back to when you were talking about how you guys were in college at the same time. You guys were both in LA, but if Kayanna went to the East Coast, you were on the West Coast. As a single person, like, you really shouldn't have, like, I guess, that much stress about it, because you're not together yet. You're still, even though you might be dating, you're just single people, and single people still have to make their own choices. There's like this weird gray area between, we're single, what we're dating. So that gives me certain responsibilities and privileges to someone else. But you're single, even you're dating, you're still single until you're married. Then you have that, then you can worry about that.
Yeah,
really shouldn't be
duty.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that principle, biblical principle, would actually, in that case, it sounds like, be the value of singleness and how important it is, and how the dividing line between single and married, there's no dividing lines in Scripture, which has been challenging for me even. It was super challenging when I was dating my wife. It was like, where's my dating guidance? Where's my engagement guidance? We had a really just confusing and challenging engagement because of stage of life. And it was like, where's my guidance? Like, it's not there. Like, it just wasn't, there wasn't anything to write about.
Yeah.
Like, but the dividing line is single and married, and singleness is really important. And so there's some value in realizing that I'm still single until committed for the rest of my life. That's really interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. And if you take the Bible too, like, the actual dating part of the Bible is like maybe 10 pages. Yeah. It's got a lot to say about how you should become as a single person, though. Yeah. It has very little to say about actually the dating process.
Right. Yeah.
It's just interesting.
Yeah, that's super helpful. It really seems like even the granular idea, Robbie, what you're talking about is the Bible gives us the principles that say, well, clearly you're in the wrong when you're putting yourself in front of your spouse. And even to Chris's route, like when I'm trying to treat my girlfriend like my wife, I was like, well, that's just not gonna work. That's outside the principles. But then when I'm trying to get more granular, it sounds like, Robbie, your next step was prayer after that, to go, God, would you speak to me directly? Which is kind of where the beginning of wisdom, actually, it's exactly what Jody said, like wisdom and applying the thing to the principle to the situation starts with asking God and him saying, I'm going to give it to you. And sometimes he's just going to literally hand it to you. Yeah. And sometimes it's going to be through people as well. And so it really sounds like you start with Bible, where are my guidelines? And then it goes next to asking God specifically and not skipping that. I have a tendency to skip that, go straight to people because they're going to actually answer me. And sometimes God's like, yeah, I'll let you just hang on the line for a while.
Yeah.
Like, don't do that. I need an answer. But then we go and confirm it with people also, which seems like
for sure,
the setup.
And the right people.
And the right people. Yeah. No, well, tell me about that. How have you found the right people in different stages? And what do you go to them about? Do you clear everything with people? Like, how granular do you get there? Do you do checkups? How much access do you give the wise people in your life to your life?
Right. Yeah. This is a super important topic, I'd say, for single people too. Just because it's really important to have those people that aren't afraid to tell you if like you're messing up. Like they're not afraid to hurt your feelings. They just want to be honest with you. So having for me, I have like a group of 5 to 6 guys that I meet with every week, and I can just tell them anything that's on my mind, and they'll tell me, hey, this sounds good. Don't do that. So I think it's extremely important for single guys, girls to have that group of people. Well, they can just be honest with them and give them the honest, but also sometimes brutal wisdom.
So not just yes people.
Yeah, don't be a yes person.
But those are the nice people.
Yeah.
I like
So
having
nice.
Follow your heart people, right? Yeah.
And I think it changes over time too. Like if I'm thinking about the people that I would reach out to for advice, like it was different when I was single or in college or in high school compared to when we were just married and didn't have kids compared to now when we have kids. And I'm sure when our kids are older, it changes because the things that are important when you're single, like when all of a sudden you have kids and you're married, it's like, okay, well now I need to like figure out how to have a relationship with my wife while there's like crazy little kids running around screaming, destroying things all the time. It's like, hey, how can we have a great relationship there, but also take care of our kids and help them, and for me, like the people that I think the theme has always been like people that have gone before me and done it well, So regardless of whatever stage I happen to be at that point in time, it's like, hey, who's gone before me? Who's done that well? Looking at the outcome of what, their way of life, of what they did. Yeah. And typically those are around. You just got to kind of look for them and ask and take the initiative to ask them.
Yeah. What does that initiative look like for you? Like if you don't have those people, or if you don't have them right now, even like what does that look like, and how can I tell, and who do I ask? Like, how do you figure it out? And literally, like, what do you say to somebody?
Yeah. I mean, I found for me that like people are pretty willing, especially people that have done things well, people are pretty willing to share what they did well, So like right now, for example, we're trying to figure out with our kids, it's like, hey, like we have a 5-year-old and he's awesome. He's amazing. But at the same time, he's totally nuts. Like at least sometimes, and he's got so much energy, and, like I love the little guy, but I know, hey, if I just like love on him and I don't discipline him, that it's not going to go well. Or if I go too far on the discipline side, it's like, okay, that's not going to go well. And we've seen people that have gone, like way too far on either edge. So like the other night I was at my parents' house and there was a guy that was there that has some kids that are, our age, and they're loving God and following him. And it's the same with like a person that I work with, like he's got kids that love God and they're following them. So, when I run into people like that and I see their kids are around and are doing great and then that they've grown up and like their parents have done it well, it's like, hey, I'm just curious, like, how did you do that? Like, you got any tips for someone like me, and just like start asking questions. And typically I find people are stoked, because they're like, like I did this and it was awesome. It's like, hey, have you found like, like the most delicious restaurant? Like you're going to tell people about that. If they ask you, where's the most delicious restaurant? And you're going to tell them and you're going to be stoked, right? Yeah. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, hey, they're stoked to tell me.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like too, if you walk in with not just, I need help, fix me, or I need help, give me all the answers. Like, whoa, what am I saying yes to? You probably get some resistance there. But when it's just specific question, hey, how did you navigate this? Especially when you see the similarity already, it's a lot better than saying, hey, what should I do? And you're giving decision rights to somebody also that you don't know you can try. Like, well, I don't have to do what you say. Maybe it's bad advice. Yeah. So even asking, that sounds really helpful to know. I need to ask somebody what they did. Not like what I should do. And that's a really good place to start. And then they earn it over time. And you're like, I can go to some people and say, tell me what to do. And I'll do it. I'm out of decision making power. For sure. But asking what they did seems like a really good place to start.
Yeah. A really good thing that I learned from Robbie too, he's great at asking questions just to anybody. He doesn't really have restraint with that.
You're right.
It's actually a pretty incredible thing, because then you hear all these different kind of stories and advice from many different people, right? And you're getting all different types of perspectives and approaches, which really, when you think about it, can create a much more well-rounded just view in terms of whatever the issue is, if it's parenting or relationships, right? But then I find for me the most helpful thing after that is then having to run it through the filter of my source of knowledge, right? So the Bible, in that sense of like, okay, so how do I run this by God, essentially?
So you run it back through the other way. You go Bible, prayer, people, and then go like, I'm going to pray and go back to the Bible.
And then how does this align with that, essentially? Because if really not, then that's where, for me, at least someone that maybe can be, especially when I was younger, more influenced by people that I respect, right? Like, I mean, we're all imperfect. So it's easy to kind of be misguided, essentially, when we are just looking to others in terms of the information and our knowledge. So for me, it's helpful to run it back through my source.
Want to have ownership of it too, because then even in a marriage, be like, if the thing I do that I got from somebody else doesn't work, then I don't want to be able to go, to my wife later and say, well, it was so-and-so's idea. I didn't mean it. Like, that's taking me totally off the hook. It was still my decision and I did it, whether it was a good idea or bad idea.
Yeah.
And so I should know that I need to take ownership, because I'm going to have to answer for it if it goes bad. And I'm going to want the credit if it goes right too, which you get to do that if you actually take ownership of it. So that's really good. I was
thinking too, because there's also people that I know that I need to not ask about something.
Do you want to list those people right now?
Right?
Names, please.
But I mean, that's also
last.
just as important, because like, especially when we first got married, we'd ask even like family members, like my mom, it's like she loves me, but I'm her baby, and like I can do nothing wrong, right?
There's a bias, essentially.
So like, since I can't do anything wrong in her eyes, like I need to not ask her about like anything having to do with our relationship, because it's always going to be not my fault, right? And so we just learned like, hey, like, and that might not be the case with everything. Like maybe with like our kids, she would give great advice, but when it comes to like our relationship, I need to like not ask her, and honestly probably not even listen to anything that she would say. Not anything, but there's like there's a wall that's there that I need to be careful with. Sorry, Mom, I love you.
But the important thing is understanding the bias so you can contextualize it for yourself. And even tell somebody. I mean, I found it helpful even when I'm asking. I'm going to say, I need your support on this. Can you just like encourage me? I'm going to make this decision, pray for me. Like, I want your support. And then sometimes it's like, no, I do need your opinion, or I need your story. I'm going to tell you what I need. And then the person is most likely going to say, oh, I'll give you what you're asking for then, instead of just a blank check.
Yeah, for sure.
Then, also if they go outside of what you asked for, you're like, you just really want to talk about that. And so also for us, it's helpful to ask other people when they ask us. If we flip this, like, hey, do you want my support? Do you want to know what I did? Or do you want my opinion? Because I'm willing to give any of them, but I want to know what you want, because I don't want to burn a bridge too, and something like that. Yeah. All right, so we've talked through, we have to know the thing, we have to understand it, apply it to our lives, we have to find the right wisdom. And that last cinder block, which again, I love that they're cinder blocks, but the last cinder block in the foundational principles is obedience. And this is the hard one, right? Because this is like, that's great that you know the things, but do you do the things? Because just because my mind has changed doesn't mean my life is any different. What does that look like for you when it comes to obedience? When have you, instead of auditing God's way or knowing it and actually doing it, when have you known it and been like, yeah, but this one feels nice, or this way feels better, or maybe I could just try it, or maybe that's outdated, or maybe that's not quite it. Like, I really want to do it this way. Were some things like that for you, Ben, when you've had a lack of obedience and then you've realized maybe there was a reason God had this for me and laid this out for me?
Yeah, I can think of one. Man, especially when we were first dating, and I think it was first dating and engaged. Like, we would get in arguments about whatever, it didn't really matter. We'd be arguing about something, and I was planning on going to law school, so I like to argue and I like to win arguments.
Really annoying.
We know where this is going,
right? And so it would probably be like half an hour into this argument. Kayanna comes from a background where you didn't really like to argue or confrontation.
Nobody argued in my family.
Yeah.
It's a good matchup.
Yeah. And in my family, it was like a competition, right? My dad's Italian, so, you can imagine how it went. So it would get to this point, and I was trying, like, I knew, like, hey, like, I know, like, if this relationship's going to work, I know that I need to, like, be kind and loving and thoughtful and blah, 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 blah. But, like, at a certain point, I just get tired, and I knew, like, we get to this point in our conversation, I knew if I said this one thing, like, I would win probably, or at least I'd feel like I was winning, but that it would just like, like make her like cry and break down or whatever, And so there's this point I would always know it, right? I'd be like, ooh, if I said this, ooh, so good.
I figured it out. I figured out the kill shot.
Yeah. And then especially early on, I would say it, and then boom, I was like, oh, but then like 2 hours later, I'm like, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, just put them through the torture.
Well, what did it look like to stop then? Like, what was that? Just like I just did it better, or was there
like in the moment, or like
was it
learning
in the
to grow
moment,
up?
or was it proactive? Like
Yeah, well, okay, so like over months, I learned to like when that thing would pop into my head, and I'm like, oh, have I just said that? I slowly learned to be like, no, I'm not going to say that. I want to, but no, I'm not going to do it. And then usually in the moment, I'd say it, and then you can get deeper into this argument, and not in a good direction. Like we'd always try to have arguments in a direction that would actually lead to us having an understanding coming out of the argument. So really, like if we were arguing, my goal at that point was to try to understand where she's coming from, and then hopefully for her goal would have been to like understand where I'm coming from, so we can come out of this with better understanding of each other, and then we can kind of like make a decision on what we want to do.
Yeah. So the principle became changing what winning means. Right?
Yeah.
Like the principle that you were saying no to, it's like God says the principle is that you two become one and figure out each other and understand each other, honor each other, love each other.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, no, I'd rather win because that feels good.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you changed what the win was so that you could actually like, you can win now.
Yeah. And it was gradual,
winning looks different.
Because you could like, we would still have that win, like as we're growing together, but then I still have that desire to, or we have that win of like, hey, trying to like understand each other is the actual win. But then I still, in my, deep in my heart, don't follow your heart, because like I wanted to like win the argument, so it was a growing experience for sure. It only took like half a decade to figure that one.
Yeah.
To try to get, no, it wasn't that bad.
I think it was clearly mutual. We were actually kind of a nice pair for destruction in terms of our arguing dynamics, at least, because he was going into it, looking to win, like it was a case. And then for me, like I said, I didn't learn how to argue growing up. That just wasn't something that was done in my family. If it was probably like after a very long amount of time and things had built up, right? And so for me, it was, well, one, terrifying to be constantly in that situation. And then two, like I was always coming from a defensive place because I felt like I had to protect myself because it wasn't my norm. And so what I learned really, though, that was just selfishness. Like, because just like for him, which I would call it that, I mean, him wanting to win, that's selfishness, right? Sure, yeah. But for me, wanting to only protect myself, I'm also not thinking of him. I'm not thinking about what he's trying to communicate, what he, the heart of the matter is, right? I'm just thinking about also kind of how do I win or how do I stay safe, whatever you want to call it, right? And so I think part of the big thing for us was, one, we were learning to become one, but two, the principle of putting the interests of others before yourself was huge for us, because once we started to really fight for the other instead of for ourselves, that was kind of the winning moment where it started to click for us of like, okay, really, I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting to know you, to understand you, and it's not about me. Yeah. And when I let go of that, I think it made all the difference.
Yeah. And like now it works out great when it's mutually like that. Yeah. But it's always the tendency to try to go back to, your own selfish ways. So it's something that you're like, at least we are trying to always, fight for. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that too, because from what I can tell and from what it's been for me, obedience always means sacrifice. And what's interesting is it wasn't just Robbie being obedient by sacrificing his desire to win. It was your sacrifice of safety to go like, I'm going to put the wall up because the wall makes me safe. Yeah. And you actually had to tear down the wall and be more vulnerable for the sake of your marriage, which helped probably because the wall makes you fight harder. Yeah. Because you're like, well, now I got to get the cannon through the wall. It's not just a defenseless target anymore. This is more challenging. But both of you had to sacrifice, which meant being vulnerable because vulnerability was where the love and honor and all of that could actually happen, which is really challenging. So obedience, if it's easy, it probably isn't obedience or fun. Yeah. Well, it's like the right thing to do is just the hard thing. Like it's just gonna be true most of the time because it's so far, like God's way is usually lined up in confrontation with our natural way because we're so self-protective all the time.
But I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm so glad we like did that hard work up front, because now it's so much easier. Like when we're arguing, I can't imagine if we never did that hard work of figuring out a good way to do that. If we had to constantly live through what we lived through in those early days.
We had arguments that went on for months. And now it's like maybe a couple hours.
Yeah, and we can figure it out.
Yeah.
There you go.
So much better.
We'll turn it into 5 minutes by the time you're done. It's going to be great. I love it. So finishing up, Jody ended with Proverbs 4, and I loved it a lot because it was such a perfect way to finish, because it was about the long term. So Proverbs 4:25-27, look straight ahead and fix your eyes on what lies before you. Mark out a straight path for your feet. Stay on the safe path. Don't get sidetracked. Keep your feet from following evil. So when it comes to relationships, I mean, for your marriage specifically, and for your relationships with your kids, Robbie and Kayanna, Chris, as you're like still in the first stage of singleness, like what is the vision for you? And vision not just being the command or the order or the like, do this because I said so, but the compelling picture of the desired future that's far out there and is like, if I keep my eyes on that, it's really far away. I will stay on a straight path toward it, which is perfect. I mean, it's literally like, it's not a fancy holier than thou verse. It's just like accurate, right? Look at the thing far on the horizon, head toward it. You'll stay on the straight path. Well, that's just physics, I guess. It's just true. So what is that picture for you? Like paint us a picture of what keeps you making day-to-day wise decisions because of what you're looking forward to in the future.
Well, this might sound like a really churchy answer, but it's really
we are literally right now.
Coincidentally. But like it's just take one day at a time. One of my favorite verses, I'm gonna butcher it. I already know it, but it's like don't worry about tomorrow because today has enough worries of its own. And I think so many single people are just like so anxious just to get in a relationship because they don't want to be alone. And that's a whole topic in and of its own, but we'll keep that for another time. But it's just take one day at a time. Keep your eyes fixed on the long term. Keep your eyes fixed on God. And maybe eventually one day you'll see someone running along beside you doing the same thing as you are and be like, hey, that person's pretty cute. Yeah. You know, maybe we can run together. And if not, then you just keep running your own race.
Yeah. So it sounds like even the picture for you right now is not, I want the marriage that I'm waiting for. It's, I want the devotion to God that is the aim of my current season of singleness. Like you're just staying there and then waiting for somebody to come alongside you, as opposed to I'm looking for the marriage, so I'm looking for the person. You're like, no, I'm looking for a life fully devoted to God. And I expect that I will line up with somebody running in the same path as me.
No, yeah, totally. It's like you're driving north on the 5 freeway.
Yeah.
And eventually an on-ramp comes on. You know, you just keep driving on the 5. The 5 goes forever. You just keep going on the 5 and eventually some cars merge onto the same freeway.
That's really helpful. So for you, the thing that's driving, I'm just going to take another lap on this. The thing that's driving you is not the picture of what you want in the future in a marriage. The picture, the thing that's going to give you the best marriage, you believe, is the end goal of the singleness season you're in. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's also
a lot of clarity, honestly.
Yeah, it's also a daily struggle though too. Right. It's not like it's like, oh, I'm just grinding in day out, just clocking in, clocking out. I'm on this.
I love it.
I love it. You know, like I'm not gonna lie. There's days where you're like, oh, I would love to be married like today. You know, but you know, doesn't come that fast.
And you don't squash that as like, and I just get that away because marriage is bad. No, it's like, that's great. And it's a real desire. And that's the thing, even what you said, like somebody that really doesn't want to be alone. Well, nobody wants to be alone. Exactly. Yeah. And so it sounds like you've leaned into friendships in a way to make sure that you are fully relationally satisfied in as many ways as humanly possible.
Totally.
So that you're not trying to fill in those needs with a lesser than relationship too.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, man. What about you guys? What's the compelling picture of the future?
Well, I think a huge leap for me, just in terms of like keeping my focus straight ahead, is, well, what I would say boundaries, but they could be like ground rules or even just like guardrails, whatever you want to call it. But basically principles that personally maybe I have set up in my life based off of the Bible, right? The knowledge that I've received and the understanding that I have of it. And then some mutually as well in our relationship, just things that maybe seems silly. Like I almost picture it like bowling. Like I'm not the best bowler. Occasionally, if I, have some great focus, I can hit it, right? I can hit the target. But if we put up those little side rails, right? Like sure, it might bounce off a few times, right? But I'm going to be a lot less likely to get a gutter ball in those situations, right? And they might seem silly or kiddish, but even just simple principles or kind of like guidelines for our relationship and even other relationships, like things like for us, like it's like, okay, we're not going to really spend a lot of time alone with maybe someone of the opposite sex, right? And sure, like a lot of other people might think that's silly or whatever, but really if my top priority is to have a healthy marriage, right? I'm not going to let anything kind of come in mess with that, even if it feels childish, right? To the extent, and obviously, like practically there are some.
But you're putting in close, tight guardrails so that you're not going, well, here's the wide path, and I know I'm not going to be unfaithful. Like,
well,
that's a broad.
Well, if I just set that as my intention is one thing, but if I actually set up
the things to keep you on the straight path to go like, I'm going to build a wall around the straight path.
Exactly. Like, then I'm going to be much more likely to get exactly where I want to be.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah. And I think like for me, I was thinking zoomed out from that even a little bit, which is like, what's the cause behind that? And it's when I think about what I want the future to look like, it's like, hey, I want to love God, number one, love Kayanna, number two, love our kids. And then, obviously everything else and everyone else after that. So it's like, hey, in terms of priority, it's like, hey, I want to make sure that like God is before my wife, right? And that my wife is before my kids. So what does that look like right now? Our kids are like life suckers, kind of, in a sense. Sorry, it's been a rough week.
You're not going to have your kids listen to this, right? Because that's you're 0 for 2 now.
But they're like constant, right? You can't stop. But at the same time, it's like, hey, if we just live in the moment of that, I'm going to come out 20 years from now and not even know who my wife is. And I don't want that. And I've seen that in people, right? So it's like, hey, like, no, like I see that, like I'm looking 40 years down the line. It's like, hey, I want Kayanna to be like the number one relationship in my life. And so I know that today, like there's all these things that are vying for my attention where if I'm not careful, like, okay, I could see it's just like we're so tired at the end of the day, like after the kids go to sleep, it's easy to just put on a Netflix, grab a beer, and then you go to sleep, and then you never actually talk to your wife after. You look back a week and you're like, wait, we haven't actually talked this whole week.
Seriously.
Right. So it's like, wait, no, like we need to like figure it, like set that, like realize that end goal and make sure that we have those boundaries so that, hey, we actually can have a great relationship in spite of what is really a busy, crazy season.
Yeah. That's a big one for me. Thinking about like when my kids are out of the house, I want to be excited about the next season I want to be excited that there's nobody left in my house. And there's a big difference between like a little anxious because it's like, well, what are we going to do now? It's like, we've been planning this for 20 years, love my kids, but we've been planning this for 20 years. This is a good season. To be excited about it. Like that's a really compelling picture for me. And the other one is I want the inspiring picture of the future is I want my kids to think of Lauren and I as a model for how to do marriage, not because we nailed it and it was perfect, but because we worked as hard as we could and the principles were obvious. Which helps how I parent also. It helps how I'm transparent.
Absolutely.
And I, ask for forgiveness for my kids or tell, like they are a little worried because we're having a not normal volume conversation or something like that. And to not be clear, like, no, everything's fine. It's like, we're arguing because we don't agree on something and we're trying really hard to because we care so much about it. It helps me explain the whole thing because I want them to look at it and go, no, I trust that they knew what they were doing, not because they got it right on the first try, but because when they didn't get it right, they worked to make it right. I think that's a picture for me because I want them to believe that about us by the end. And so they can flourish and not go like, I spent 15 years in my marriage just sorting out what my parents handed me because that was crap.
Sounds fun.
So, well, that's all I've got for us today. Anything that you, when you look at this next week, even like what it looks like to reorient this idea of knowing, understanding, seeking and applying wisdom and living in obedience. Anything clear this week to you? Like, I got to sort that out. I got to start doing that, or this would be an act of obedience for me this week. Anything along those lines?
For me, it's figuring out, like just I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we're figuring out like these little details of things that like the freaking cat litter. Like we have this little robot thing that cleans the litter and it's supposed to buzz us when it needs to be taken out. But recently it just hasn't been working because every time we go into the garage, there's like cat pee and poop everywhere and I hate it. And it's been like a month. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, like we have this thing. That's what I'm trying to figure out is, hey, how do we do this? It's like a practical thing that needs to be done. And we're both busy, but okay, how do we work this out in our relationship? Where it's like, okay, like, am I going to take care of that? Or are you going to take care of that? And how should I approach it even really? It's like, hey, maybe I should just like whenever, So that's what I'm trying to, it sounds like a silly thing, but it is something that like we were like arguing in the car yesterday. Like, hey, how are we going to figure this out? Because like, I don't like, I'm busy, you're busy. We're both tired. How are we going to do this? But we know like that end goal, like, hey, we want to like love each other. We want to love God. We want to put each other's interests first. Like, okay, how are we going to do this?
Yeah. Not just team up to conquer the kitty litter, but actually like each other at the end of it.
Exactly. And it sounds like a
each
silly thing, but it's like that's what it really boils down to, you know?
All the little things.
Yeah.
It's true. Anybody else? Act of obedience this week? What would this look like in practice?
Taking out the kitty litter.
Nailed it.
Right.
See, that was good that you went first, right? That was good.
Set me up.
Act of obedience. I guess the one thing, because I wrote down my 4 pillars right here because I almost forgot them. But I know Proverbs came up a lot in the message, and Proverbs is just literally an infinite source of wisdom.
Seriously.
So it could be a good thing for me to dive through and just get all that wisdom I possibly can.
Yeah.
Just learn to stay on the straight and narrow, and
Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's always good to get those moments where you actually take the things, like take the kernels, take the principles, and actually go, well, do I actually believe that or not? Do I think that? And if somebody looked at my life, this is a question I hate, but I like, but I hate. Somebody looked at my life and saw all my thoughts, would they believe that I believed this?
Right.
And you're like, oh, maybe not always. But that's a helpful question. It detaches you from yourself. So that sounds like kind of that kind of activity.
Yeah.
It's a good and challenging way to read the Bible. Right. Well, this has been great. Thank you guys for sharing. Also for just being a bit vulnerable too. Like this stuff, like none of this is supposed to be that we hear the thing on Sunday and we just go, yeah, God is good and so am I. It's really not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be God is good and I'm going that direction.
Right.
But the question is always not just like, what can I pat myself on the back for, but what challenges me and what am I going to do about it? And so thanks for sharing a little bit of that today.
Of course.
And the rest of the series is going to be so fun because we're going to start moving toward not just that foundation, but some of the actual things. What are the pillars that God says, this is true about relationships. This is how I made them. This is what works best. And so we're going to be diving into that with some other conversations as we go. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you tune back in with us. We'll do this every week for this series with some new guests every single week. So thanks for jumping on this week, you guys. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tommy.
Much love. See y'all soon.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Bye.